Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on the road to COP30, Local Voices, Global Pathways. This is the 10th and concluding event. Yes, COP30 finally did happen in a series of 10 webinars hosted by the Columbia Global Centers, or locations, as you all know, around the world. I'm Tom Trebat. I'm the director of the Rio de Janeiro Global Center of Columbia. I want to start today. I'll explain in a moment why it's so fitting that Rio kind of is the concluding act in this 10-part series. But at first, a very warm welcome to our distinguished speakers, whom I'll be introducing to you shortly, and to all of you online and listening to us on recording, joining us from various points around the world. It's a beautiful kind of scheme I think we put together to have voices from all over the world, and I'm very proud now to be playing our role. This is a very special event, this webinar this morning, for many reasons. Obviously, first and foremost, because COP30 was held right here in Brazil, in Belém. Brazil has a very storied history of climate leadership, as you know. We may need to be reminded, dating back to ECHO 92, the regional Earth Summit here in the city that I'm addressing you from in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. So that led to the UNFCCC, the Paris Accords, and now to this very lengthy list, 30 annual COP meetings. And Brazil, and so there's a long history here and a deep commitment in this country and its leadership over decades in the field of climate and environmental awareness and environmental action and global leadership, I might add. Brazil and I suspect most of the world have prepared carefully for COP30, knowing how much was at stake and the challenging geopolitical environment we were in. Then the two-week event kind of unfolded in a blizzard of media coverage and contradictory points of view and opinions of all sorts coming out of the two-week session. But basically all asking and probing for the same question: was it a success or a failure, or, as life usually is, a little bit of both? We have the privilege of hearing today in this final webinar hearing from 4 Brazilian leaders speaking to us each from their particular point of view, although they're free to take their allotted time wherever they wish, but we are representatives of the business community. Again, I'll be introducing them to you shortly. Community leaders, perspectives from youth. Each one of our 10 seminars has involved youth representatives, and we will as well. And then from perspectives as well from the nonprofit sector, philanthropy, and think tanks. Here's a little bit about how we structured the seminar after some stage setting remarks in the forms of open-ended questions that I will pose to the panelists. And I don't have to answer, luckily. They'll be here to help us answer them if any of them have merit. Each of our 4 speakers then, in their introductory remarks, will be asked to speak for 7 or 8 minutes. On their principal reflections, what went well at COP30 from their point of view, and maybe what didn't. Then my colleague Badaki from Teachers College will facilitate a Q&A with our speakers and with those of you online. And yes, you all listening online are urged, encouraged, begged to put your questions into the chat so that we can take maximum advantage of this event that we have today. And then finally, there'll be, we get to about the 75-minute mark, there'll be some concluding remarks by the moderator, maybe a little help from my friends, the panelists here, and we'll be preparing the way hopefully for COP31. I would also like to say, please stay on the line long enough at the end of today's webinar to answer a brief survey about this convening. It really helps us, especially as we continue these sorts of global initiatives, local voices, global issues, as we continue those initiatives into the future. Our 4 speakers, I've come to that part. Our first, I've mentioned her name already, Dr. OreOluwa Badaki. Or you might just give a little wave there so they'll know who you are. As a research scholar with the Digital Futures Institute at Teachers College, Columbia University. and also affiliated with the Learning the Earth with Artificial Intelligence and Physics, very fascinating initiative at the Columbia Engineering School. So welcome, Ori, and she'll be the Q&A. So she's my accomplice in all of this. She'll be the leading the Q&A. My very good friend, Luciana Ribeiro, well known to all of us as the CEO and founder of a relatively new venture known as Flying Rivers Capital, a great name, a Latin America-focused investment platform mobilizing capital toward the energy transition and global decarbonization. She seems, however, to, in addition to her professional endeavors, be everywhere all at once. She currently serves and has been serving as the chair of the finance working group of what is known as the Sustainable Business COP, mobilizing the business community in Brazil and interfacing with the business community all over the world with respect to issues that are of concern to businesses at COP. So Luciana will be with us. Kamila, we're happy to have you with us again. Kamila is the founder of the OreOluwa Institute and a social entrepreneur, widely recognized as such, and also as a podcaster of some renown. And she's dedicated, Kamila is, to connecting people, nature, and technology to drive meaningful change, and especially for communities often left out of major decisions. Carla Braga, whom I assume will be joining us at a point in time, is a UN Youth Ambassador and Executive Director of a very interesting NGO based in Belém, Pará, which brings together young Amazonian leaders. She's based in Belém, so hopefully she'll be joining us in the course of this morning's event. And then finally, Cíntya Feitosa. Cíntya, you give us a quick wave there so we can see your name. Cíntya, welcome. She is a senior specialist at the Institute for Climate and Society here in Rio de Janeiro. It is the ICS is the gold standard, in my view, of a philanthropic organization, a think tank, and a networker on all the critical issues of climate. Cíntya has 15 years of experience in mobilizing political and social environmental causes and has been engaged in international climate negotiations and advocacy strategies since 2015. So that's a lot of experience to bring to bear this morning. Thank you, Cíntya. Thank you to every one of you. Now, I think I've done most of my homework here that was set up for me. I did, though, want to ask a few pointed questions. Maybe I've said enough. A few pointed questions, if I could, just to kind of kick things off. Again, you don't have to answer these. It's not even multiple choice, but if you care to take off on some of the issues that I think, for those of us listening online, occur to us, non-experts, maybe most of us weren't able to go to Belém, what we think the questions occur to us. The first it took place under very challenging geopolitical circumstances, no greater challenges perhaps than the situation of the US administration, their attitude toward climate, but also in situation of war, a clumsy rollout of tariffs that has roiled the global economy. But Brazil has shown before, during, and now, especially after, that this was a victory for multilateralism. Countries that wanted to go it alone, my country first, so to speak, didn't prevail in terms of global climate. Is that true? Did Brazil succeed in being a beacon and a source of hope for multilateralism? Second, Brazil talked about this being a COP of implementation. Enough talk. We've got the rules, we've got the regulations, we've negotiated in the previous 29 COPs. It's time to implement what we agreed to. Did that really happen? Or is inexorably the planet continuing to warm above 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels because there just wasn't enough implementation that was evident in the meeting? So that's the second question. Third is the issue of what was achieved in climate finance, including for the energy transition and decarbonization. Was it what we expected, or is it maybe my own bias, maybe less than what was expected? There were important initiatives, the Belém Action Mechanism, which promises $1.3 trillion per year through 2035 to help poor countries adapt but that promise sounds familiar. It's been made before. There was also a Belém Health Action Fund linked. There's an initiative for tropical forests forever, which is important. But all in all, what really was accomplished in terms of climate finance, and was it, as I suspect, less than expected? Fourth, was this really what I always expected it to be, what I think President Lula and the Brazilian authorities wanted? Well, this is the COP of the rainforests. So it's hot, so it's humid, deal with it. This is where the world's lungs, this is where the world, our best hope against climate change is to preserve the rainforest. Or really was the attention diverted prematurely from the rainforest because of the attention paid to fossil fuel, the famous roadmap to elimination of fossil fuels? And were the indigenous peoples who were there in record numbers? We all heard about that, and there's a tropical forest initiative that's come out of it. Was that an important development, or was it maybe less than meets the eye? What met the eye was impressive, but what really came out of this for indigenous peoples and local communities in the Amazon? And finally, and I promised then to turn it over to you at this point, did this 30th COP remind us of the limits of consensus seeking in global negotiations? And did it, I suspect that it did, and did it give, but did it also give rise to what might be the next phase in global climate negotiations, the so-called coalitions of the climate willing, as Ambassador Correia do Lago made much of a point of illustrating what Brazilians refer to the action agenda post COP30 isn't around consensus. It's about a series of actions and voluntary groups. One to create a roadmap to phase out fossil fuels, another on trade and climate policy and the conflicts between them and the impacts on emerging economies, and a third on tropical forests. So those are the kind of questions I wanted to pose here at the outset. I'm glad I don't have to answer them, and I didn't want to be too editorialized any more than might be helpful in posing those questions to you. But if the panelists are still with me, I'll remind you your first intervention, if you could please keep it to 7 or 8 minutes. I'd love to hear you more. We all would, but maybe by keeping it to 7 or 8 minutes, we'll get a lot of different ideas out on the floor and have more time for Q&A and to hear from you also from each of you panelists later on. We're going to, I'll turn it back to you with a reminder, Luciana Ribeiro from CEO Flying Lures Capital. Luciana, seja muito bem-vinda. Welcome to our seminar, and we'd love to hear from you now.
Thank you, Tom. What a pleasure to be here with you, with the Global Center from Rio, with my friends. Nice to see Kamila again. We have been in this journey for a long time together. I loved your questions, the provocations you did. And maybe let me give a step back and tell you guys a little bit of what was Sustainable Business COP, because I think that from that perspective, I can evolve in what were my impressions of COP. So when we first started the year, we just had an interesting experience through the G20 in Brazil, where we had the B20 as the congregation of the private sector voice towards the G20 initiative. And it was very successful last year on that. So when we started this year with the hosting COP30, the private sector had the initiative of pretty much replicating what we did last year in the B20, G20 experience in COP. So we launched the Sustainable Business COP as an initiative that came from CNI, the Confederation of National Industries. And it began as a Brazilian initiative with CNI from Brazil. And luckily enough, it became an international, global initiative very fast. At the end of the process, we had like 65 associations throughout the world joining the efforts, and more than 40 million companies throughout the world joining the initiative. And what was the goal here? The goal was, listen, we are going into the decade of implementation. We know that the private sector has a very relevant role in the implementation process. We know that more than 70% of the money that we need to implement initiatives are going to come from the private sector. So how we can bring the private sector into the COP process, both in the negotiation discussion, but also in bringing real cases that can demonstrate how the implementation looks like. And so when we started the Sustainable Business COP, we had 9 different tracks. I was leading the finance track. And the idea was, what are the priorities that we want to highlight in the negotiation through the COP negotiation? And what are the cases that can be brought in to demonstrate what has been done? And we were very successful in both of those initiatives. We were able to deliver to Embaixador Correa do Lago a set of recommendations from the private sector, from the different workforces. And we brought together more than 600 cases that pretty much were a demonstration of things that were already in place, were already happening, were scaling, and that were this complementarity of the private sector with the public sector in fostering the initiatives. So first of all, I think that was it was a highlight from COP to have the private sector very aligned and throughout the year, we had all these discussions. So in Belém or in São Paulo, where most of the private sector was united, it was not just the event itself, but it was the conclusion of a year-long process through which we discuss, we try to build transactions, we try to scale what was already happening. So in this sense, I think that COP was very good. There's another element that I think it's very important, that is how Brazil played its role. Brazil, I think, was very successful in demonstrating how the middle powers can play a relevant role in the scenario of fragmentation and of geopolitical tensions. Brazil was able to deliver the TFFF, which was a very relevant movement, not only for Brazil, but for globally. And I think that Brazil was also very important to showcase how to solve certain problems that we have been talking about these problems for a long time when we are talking about investing in emerging economies, but we were not able till this point to bring solutions. When we are talking about emerging economies, the two main discussions that are usually there are cost of capital, how international investors are going to bring money to emerging economies, considering that the cost of capital in emerging economies is so high. And the second element that's usually a topic very common in the finance world when we are discussing about emerging economies is how we are going to deal with the foreign exchange risk and how we are going to bring certain reassurance for international investors that their investment is not going to be wiped out because of foreign exchange risk. And again, I think that Brazil was very competent in bringing specific financial solutions that were designed by the Treasury and by the Development Bank, by BNDES, in both of these aspects. We had the launch 1.5 years ago of the EcoInvest platform that today has already many instruments implemented that are indeed reducing cost of capital and bringing a certain level of security to international investors on the FX foreign exchange risk. And why that's important? That's important to Brazil, of course, because Brazil is addressing these problems and therefore can attract more international investors. But mostly, I think that for me, the key, and I'm concluding here, Tom, to stick on the 7 minutes, is that Brazil brought a leadership into those thematics not only solving the problem to Brazil, but also showing the rest of the global south, the rest of the emerging economies, how we can address those problems that are so symptomatic of emerging economies, but that need to be addressed in order for us to have more investments in climate in other sectors. So for me, Brazil was very, even though if you ask me, have we reached all the conclusions and all the marks that we wanted? No, we have not. But I think that it's impossible to believe that we are going to have in one specific event all the solutions addressed. I think that it's a path forward, and we have to move in the right direction. And I think that COP for me was moving in the right direction and having Brazil as a leadership for the global south, specifically when we are talking about finance solutions and how can we scale climate investments. So to keep on the 7 minutes, which is not an easy task, those are my remarks.
We would not expect anything less than punctuality from a business leader of such as yourself, of such renown. That what struck me there was the 40 million companies around the world, kind of a headline number that came from your remarks. But more importantly, the emphasis when in the news reports about what happened at COP30 was there was an army of lobbyists there, kind of like throwing sand in the wheels of progress on climate. And it's good to know that there are many companies that are seeing the interests of the future as not only the solutions for the warming planet, but good business opportunities too, and they want to move forward. So, Luciana, thank you for bringing that perspective to bear, and we'll have some more questions for you as we proceed in today's event. Camila, I've got you next up to address your issues, Camila, coming back from Belém, and based upon your history of work with communities, of involving communities who are excluded voices. Your thoughts, please. What you found at COP30 that encourages you, and maybe what left you a little bit discouraged after the meetings have concluded. Camila, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tom and Columbia Center, for having me. I have like a few thoughts and a very, I would say, almost pessimist vision, but it's like I keep my hope active. So in terms of, does Brazil succeed on being a beacon for multilateralism? I would say yes, but yes, we are doing a miracle, having 194 parties still talking, even with all geopolitical scenario so against any of the objective of the conference. So we proved that global collaboration, and especially like we still are able to talk, even when some parties decide to not come and to not sit on a table. And I think for a second aspect on this is so good to be in a democracy again, and people having a freedom to protest, having freedom to speak their minds without the risk of being in jail. That was something that we were craving for 4 years. And it is really, really good that we are back on track at this point. And I feel that like we made several mistakes as a presidency, for sure. The first one was we knew that our presidency would be ours 3 years ago, and we just organized our structure to manage it like we just announced the presidency on 25th of January this year. So we lost time in terms of articulating, bring together the other parties. We all know that the Paris Agreement, for example, was crafted for over 3 years to get the Paris in 2015. So like, I think it was kind of naive from our side think that we could deliver something similar to Paris Agreement in such short notice. And of course, the agenda was contradictory, right? We were saying we are biostate, but 15 days before the conference, we allow one more oil exploration. We sanction continue to coal production in Brazil till 2040. So that was like, we were, okay, we are saying to the parties, you need to do your part, but we were like kind of losing ourselves in our own agenda as a country. That makes me not just like unsatisfied, but makes me really, I feel like what I'm doing here, you know, like some of the discussions were at this type of thing for me. But at the same time, was the COP of implementation, if we were talking from a people perspective, for sure. The solutions were there being presented. Communities were showing how strong they continue to be, even with all the scenarios and all the stakes against them. I feel that like investors especially were there, and their appetite for a more long-term vision were in the table for discussions. Maybe the projects are not enough yet, but at least they were there talking and, you know, presenting and able to listening communities that happen. We have like in the whole city over 3,000 indigenous leaders being part of conversations, and around 1,000 of them inside of the blue zone. We know that it was like a moment that they feel they weren't being heard as much as they should. But it is a record if you compare indigenous and local communities' participation for the 29 COPs previous, right? So like we actually achieve social civil society engagement and participation like in numbers that we never had before. Even with Dubai, that was really like civil society engaged conference. The lane showed so much life. I never saw, like, I've been going to COPs for 5 years now, and I never saw a city being so part of the event. Over 60 houses that are legacies for the city. Buildings were like retrofit. They were like all prepared for the conferences, but they stay in the city as a culture legacy, which is amazing. Regarding the TFFF, I have like so many things to comment about that, but like I would say that the intention is good. The fact that now we have at least a financial mechanism to direct funds to forest is impressive. We still need to figure it out how to actually make the money goes to the hands of those that really need and matter. The 20% for indigenous people is really nice, but how many of them can actually apply to BNDES and access the money? So we have like a long road there till the money actually goes to the people, but just having the mechanism is amazing. And in terms of like coalitions of climate willing, you know, we just saw in the closing plenary how divided we were in this moment. But the coalitions are being made. I feel that like there's nations and parties willing to do their parts and actually like sacrifice. I feel that like at some point we kind of lose a little bit what consensus means. It doesn't mean that everyone wants something. It means that everyone loses something in favor of something bigger. And we were like crafting conversations more on what is only best for my sovereign country than for the global benefits. And I feel that like we lose ourselves. Like we had a chance to at least won the zero deforestation by 2030, 2050. And at the end, we lost all of that. Like we couldn't keep it, either the zero deforestation or the roadmap to transitioning away from fossil fuels. But I understand that just having a conference 4 months from now to talk about the transitioning away from fossil fuels is a victory. Being able to stop the closing plenary and talking again with the parties after the objection of Colombia. It was really a moment that was important to set up the global stage to understand, there's parties that are not satisfied with the way things are being conducted right now. And communities, most of them are not in the rooms, but they are doing their best to contribute. I feel that, like, as my organization, we were in more than 20 talks, just as one organization, 40 events. If we count how many events actually happen in 2 weeks in Berlin, if my math is good, we highlight at least 10,000 events happening in the city. Yeah, so it's FOMO, right? Like, impossible being everything. But I'm happy that we could deliver a moment of talking in such a fragmented world and moment in our history. And I hope we can keep talking. I know I'm like remembering of the Minister of the Future book. I feel that at some point in COP, we're almost in the same scenario as described in the book. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kamila. Very thought-provoking, very wonderful perspective. 10,000 meetings, is that what you said, or something of that nature? The start of something for sure. Just a quick word to kind of connect some of the dots here that both Camila and Luciana have mentioned this Tropical Forest Forever Fund. We can come back to that later, whether that means anything, but it's a significant headline amount of money, $6.5 billion committed so far, a goal of $10 billion by the end of the year. So that's important. And Camila referred to a particularly Brazilian twist on things, that President Lula and the Brazilian government, 15 days before COP convened, had finally authorized drilling to occur, oil exploration to occur in the Amazon basin. That's highly disputed. The Minister of Environment, Marina Silva, has been against, but that was approved. So Camila, the world, as you remind us, is not a straightforward place. We don't make progress always in a straight line, and there are some contradictions we have to deal with. But I think at the end of the day, President Lula intervened himself to make sure that things were set. We left Berlin not in a muddle, but with a firm conviction that we've got to zero deforestation in particular has to be foremost in our agenda, and there needs to be a roadmap to end fossil fuels. Phew. But anyway, thanks both of you who spoke first. In the meantime, Carla Braga has joined us. I think she is in Berlin. Carla, I'm going to let you rest for just a minute while you catch up with the conversation. But I did introduce you before. It's a pleasure to have you representing. You got a lot of responsibility representing the youth of the Amazonian region. So hopefully your internet will remain stable, and you'll give us your remarks in just a little bit. But I'd like to turn first, if I could, to Cíntya. Cíntya Feitosa from, now where am I seeing her there? Is she there? Cíntya?
Thanks, Tom, and thanks. It's good
to be there you are.
I'm
kind of glancing for you on my screen. I'm obviously sorry for that awkward moment there, Cíntya, but thank you so much. From the Institute of Climate and Society, to remind folks who you are, and a senior specialist with many years of experience in climate negotiations. Cíntya, welcome.
Yes, and thanks, Tom, and thanks again for having me. And also, it's a pleasure to be among friends after 10 days. And so we had some time to reflect a bit, and also to debrief, and also to rest, because it was quite challenging these 3 years actually of preparation, not only for COP itself, but we had looking behind, we had the BRICS Plus, we had the G20, we had the Amazon Summit in 2023, and so it was quite challenging also for civil society. And as preparation, we felt that we were also presidents of this COP and all of these movements. And so it's part of already my thoughts here to share the role of civil society and how it was well played, and also how it was good to have the vibrant civil society, how it was good to have more than 70,000 people on the streets. We didn't have quite march and protest since Glasgow, and in Glasgow it was during the pandemics, and so it was challenging as well. And it's good to see the dynamics, and we can see the difference that it does inside the negotiation rooms, inside the venue, and inside the talks. And I pretty agree that this make an influence to the negotiations as well, although the results are not necessarily what the peoples were expecting, what we were expecting in the end. But I always say that evaluating a COP as either a success or a failure is in binary terms is a trap. And so even so, as a Brazilian, I would love to be able to tell only a success story. And thanks, Camila, for bringing already things that were not this beautiful about the COP in Brazil. And so let's try to focus here also in some legacies that we can have. And also as a Brazilian, I promised myself to not be the person that will comment COP about what it could be and wasn't. And so let's move forward and think about the roadmaps and the future that we have. Just to bring some of context, there were like enormous expectations, not only because a COP in Brazil and the big participation of civil society, but also because it marked the 10th anniversary of Paris Agreement. So it's a thing that brought some weight in our shoulders as well. We didn't have the NDCs on time for the COP. We didn't have the engagement of other countries. So of course, the Brazilian presidency has its responsibility on how the process was conducted, on how things came from G20 and BRICS, but also it's a multilateral process and not only reflecting on the consensus basis approach as Tom reminded us at the beginning, but also that is multilateral. And so we should have other leaders, especially when we don't have one in particular that's not with the agreement anymore. And so other countries and other leadership could also bring their role more visible throughout the year, not only during the COP. And so let's see how it will be for the next year, as the presidency of Brazil has just started. So let's keep our minds and our strength with the Brazilian presidency, because we still have 1 year in preparation for the next COP. We must see COPs as process and not only as an event. And so the Brazilian presidency will need support, and also the vision from civil society and other stakeholders to the roadmaps and for everything that we must deliver throughout the next year. With expectations so high, it was really hard to avoid some frustration in a COP in Brazil, but we did have some things to celebrate. So of course we were expecting more on the results of the roadmap Baku to Belém on finance, and let's see how it will be for the next year. There is still time as well to reflect on what's the role of Brazil in delivering this with the civil society participation as well. But we did have some advance in specific areas. So we have a more explicit integration of international trade into the climate agenda. And it's also a thing that civil society, think tanks, and business sector must pay attention in the following year. We have some high-level tables and high-level events mandated by the decisions of COP, including on implementation of the global stocktake. So of course, the roadmaps are there. Brazil lead on these, but in the decisions we have some particular decisions regarding the implementation of NDCs, regarding of the implementation of the global stocktake, and we must remind ourselves of the role and also the limitations of the UNFCCC as we are discussing, and so how the implementation will need to feed into the process of negotiations, but also more in relation to what's happening outside the convention. I think here as well, civil society, think tanks, philanthropies has like an incredible role to play to support this. And also we had some opening to difficult discussions in the convention. Of course, we were expecting more results on adaptation. That was quite something that was important for civil society, for local communities, for indigenous peoples, and it's important for business as well. And so it was a thing that we were expecting that had more, were more highlighted during COP, and it wasn't, but we do have something related to adaptation finance that we should look with attention for the next decade. And also we had a mechanism to discuss just transition, and it was a victory of civil society as well, because it was a priority for global civil society to have the discussion on just transition more inside the conference. And also I would like to highlight and just to conclude on two topics that was like negotiation versus action. So of course we need this coalition of willing, but at this moment we need the coalitions of doing as well. And so we expect that also after this action agenda reformed and how the action agenda outside the negotiation process, but also inside the negotiation, since a decision as well by countries inside the convention, how we can have the action agenda more connected to the process and more implementing on the global stock take, preparing for the next cycle of the global stock take, because we need to remind ourselves that the cycle is 5 years, so we need to improve year by year the discussion on implementation. And finally, as Kamila also highlighted, we had, I would bet on the 10,000 events as well, but we need to celebrate their role and strengthen not only from environmental civil society, but we have new faces on the climate movement. I am certain that it's a legacy of COP30, as we had for Rio 92, as we had for Rio Plus 20, things that happened in Brazil and created new movements. And I am certain that it will be the case for the environmental movement in Brazil, but also globally after this COP. Of course, we will look this in years, maybe next year or in 2 years, 5 years, and we will realize that many organizations, new movements were created or succeeded after this COP. And it was also a really relevant mark to have more space for traditional communities, not only indigenous peoples, but we have many other communities that were mentioned in text. We have mentioned 2 Afro-descendant people. That's like the first time that it happens, and it's matter a lot for not only for Brazil, but many other countries that have like the diaspora and also these vulnerable communities and also communities that can provide solutions. So we have things to celebrate. We have also the subnational governments that played a role, but I will let this for my next intervention if possible. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cíntya. That's a fascinating overview of civil society, maybe the work before us in terms of civil society, think tanks, philanthropies, shifting gears a little bit to focus on the roadmap, which is really one of the more extraordinary things that came unexpectedly out of the COP30 was the roadmap to the elimination of fossil fuels. Ultimately, 80 countries voted for it, but 85 voted against it, and it kind of but it's an issue that, having been raised, as Cíntya is pointing out, it's not going to go away. And I think the organization of civil society around that issue is going to be very important. And it also reminds me, Cíntya, maybe as we continue our discussion, the role of how big a role disinformation is playing in kind of the global willingness to take on important climate actions, to fund Luciana, new industries, to provide capital. We're really going to go back to an era. Are we losing that battle of information about the role of fossil fuels, coal and oil and gas in warming the planet? Is that at risk of losing that kind of information battle? I think that's another reason why philanthropy such as your own and think tanks such as your own are so very important. So thank you very, very much, Cíntya. We'll turn then to giving you a chance to catch up with this, Carla. And I've already introduced you. I'll say again, though, that you are a very distinguished young Amazonian leader and are head of an organization known as COJovem, which is a grouping, you could tell us about it if you'd like to for a minute or so, of young Amazonian leaders for sustainable development. So Carla, please, for 7 or 8 minutes, your first intervention, welcome, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you, Thomas, and to Columbia Global to invite me to this session. And Thomas, you give me the hard work to speak after Cíntya, especially because she's an amazing specialist about the climate science and follow the negotiations many, many years. But I will do my best, of course. And I would like the legacies of COP for the youth and the climate vulnerable communities, especially because in this COP, the young peoples and the children had a big participants. And first of all, I would like to start recognizing the progress where it happened at COP30. And the Brazilian president advanced as much as possible on several fronts, especially through the Belém political pacts and where we had 29 decisions that moved us forward in areas such as just transition, adaptation finance, trade, gender, and technologies. And among the great achievements of the COP30, I think that the creations of the Tropical Forest Forever Fund was amazing and represents a historic step towards valuing tropical forests and those who protected them, because we always say that in the forest have people and we need to take care of the people to take care of the forest. But now we need to consider how we are going to get the TFFF mechanisms to reach the grassroots level and avoid the risk of repeating the mistakes of other funds and mechanisms that have precisely this problem of getting the funding to the communities, as happened especially here in the state of Pará with the environment service payments mechanisms. And I believe that on adaptation finance, we saw important commitments, like the fact that countries agreed to trip adaptation finance by 2035 and to emphasize the responsibility of developed nations to scale up funding for developing countries. And well, this is essential when we consider that 8.6 million children under 18 live at risks of water scarcity, and 7.3 million children are exposed to riverine flooding worldwide. And these numbers remind us that adaptation is not abstract. It is about protecting life. So we are very happy to advance it in this topic. And I believe that another major step came into the recognition of the justice and equity of transition process, where the COP approved documents stressing that just transition must center people not only as beneficiaries, but as protagonists. For the first time and in the COP history, Afro-descendant population were explicitly mentioned in the final test, and this is amazing, especially from the traditional people. And this is a milestone for racial justice with climate governance. And on gender equity, we also advanced as well, where we saw countries adopted a new gender action plan, expanding gender responsive budget and finance, and strengthening the leadership of indigenous, Afro-descendant, and rural women in climate solution. And this is very important, especially for us who are living in the territory and who saw the people who are building this resilience in the territory. And well, however, not all priorities moved forward. And I think that Kamila spoke about this in her speech. But I would like to highlight that the countries adopted a new gender action plan. No, I would like to highlight that Brazilian key goals in the roadmap to phase out fossil fuels dependent economies, and understand that it did not reach consensus. And this shows how complex and urgent the global debate still is. But we must also be honest about contradictions, especially with Brazil domestic context, as Kamila said. And as expected, the roadmap for a just transition was not approved because, well, as we know, this is a very polemic thematic at the negotiations process and in the Brazilian domestic context as well. And we are thinking about how can we advocate globally for a fossil-free economy, while here in Brazil, we are pushing forward oil exploitation in the mouth of the Amazon River. And well, as Kamila said, we had the moment like what we are doing here, especially because in your territory, you are talking about the fossil exploration. But well, we know that, as Cíntya said, the civil society have an important role in the negotiations and to do pressure in the government. So we are fighting against the oil exploitation here, especially because this project is deeply harmful to the future generations. So we are trying to understand how we can build paths who are truly compromised with your territory, especially in the Amazon people, because the Amazon is not a climate strategy. It is a home, it's my home. And people depends on the rivers, the people depends the forest, and the people will bear the most impacts of the oil exploitation. And the same people are the ones keeping the forest standing. And we have to think about it. But a good news that we have at COP30 that makes me think about a COP about implementation as well was the fact that we had 10 territories demarcated during the COP30, with demonstrated clear evidence of implementation with the agenda of the mitigations and protecting the people who protect the forest. It was also the first time that we have a COP for children. And this demonstrates a great advantage in the inclusion of children and adolescents at the COP process. And I had the pleasure, for example, to accompany a delegation of engaged teenagers from UNICEF and from Jovem Institute, who also showed how much they have to contribute to discussion on climate and human rights. And this was an agenda we had been pushing since the COP28. So I think that this was a good COP, but we had a lot of things to do, especially when we speak about the domestic public policies in the Brazil.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carly, of a broad review, fascinating issues that you emphasize and also introduce to our conversation here. You mentioned at the very end, just to make it clear, that Brazil has set aside 10 new territories for indigenous peoples. That immediately became controversial in Brazil, so hopefully the government will follow through on that. But in so many other ways, the role of children, the importance of the roadmaps. Thank you very much, Carla, for joining us with those comments and adding so much to the conversation. All four of you who have spoken. I'm running, as I usually do, I might add, a little bit behind because the conversation has been such a rich one, but I'm going to put myself on mute here and call in my accomplice, Professor Badaki. Ori, I'm going to turn over to you for the facilitated Q&A with each of our four panelists. And to those of you listening online, I'm going to remind you of your homework, which is to populate that Q&A little box at the bottom of your screen and put some questions in there that you'd like to have Ori formulate to the speakers. Ori, welcome back. Nice to see you. Please take it from here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. Oi, boa tarde. Muito prazer para be here with you all. I'm super honored and excited to help continue usher in a new phase of the conversation and think about some cross-pollination. As we can hear, these conversations have been happening for decades. And so we get to be privy to kind of new developments. I am going to start with one question, a broad question for everybody. And as Tom was saying, I'm going to be keeping my eye on the chat, so please feel free to populate that. I'm going to come back to, I think, something that has been weaved in throughout the conversation, which is the promise and peril of, of compromise, right? And consensus building. I think something that you said, Kamila, about reframing how we think about consensus, not just like everybody throw in some ideas and see what happens, right? We actually have to give something up in some way. And I think something that gets lost often in sort of these bigger multilateral conversations is how much consensus building happens within sectors, right? Not every sector has one voice, as we heard from Luciana at the beginning, right? You had thousands of organizations, thousands of businesses involved. And so I'd love us to think a little bit more about the coalition, the hard work of coalition building within sectors, and what can be learned, right, in the work that you all do, because there's no way your entire sector can be represented by just this one voice, right? And you speak to that. And so I'm curious if there are ways of consensus building within your sectors that wider, sort of more macro level conversations at COP or globally can learn from. And I'm just going to also highlight the aspect that Tom had mentioned at the beginning, which is this being, a COP of the willing, or at least the coalition of the willing. And by that, we know that some people won't be willing, right? That by definition, some people are not willing. So what happens to those voices? What happens in those conversations before you even get to the stage where you're at this global stage?
Do I start? Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. I feel like there's 3 points for me. One, my civil society, it's not homogeneous at all. And it changes, like, for the vision that you have for the organization to the strategy of the funders that very often drive how we decide to perceive our goals as organizations. So I feel that, like, to be able to build better coalitions, we need a more strategic approach as civil society as a whole. Not saying that we're gonna say one thing at the same tone at the same time, but saying that, like, at least we are pedaling to the same direction. And to be able to do that, we need a strategy. And I say that because in the middle of the conference, for example, tons of organizations were like, we are losing space, we are losing momentum. Now it's the time to build, to do together, to raise our voices. But we could do that before. Like, we could be together and organized before, but what was blocking us to do that is our own ambition to continue to have our organizations. So, like, we were fighting for funds, we were fighting to pay salaries, there's those things that are like organizations' interest. It's the same with the parties. Like, they're there fighting for their own sovereignty and trying to make sense if gave up their red lines it's possible or not. And as organizations, we are doing the same. Second aspect for me to especially invest and continue to build momentum is we need to understand that communication, it is a key. And most of those blocking the conversations have billions of dollars and propaganda every year. And you cannot think that it is possible for the civil society, not well funded enough, fight the engine propaganda of fossil fuels. It's really, really hard. So, like, we need to put our effort and make the message available, simple. And it's sometimes to make the message available means that we are not saying, like, we are not neglecting science, but we need to meet people where they are. We need to talk to values. We need to talk to principles. We need to go, especially when we are talking in such an extreme moment as society, if we don't talk to the values of the people, they won't listen at all. And finally, I feel that like in civil society, we need to be able to do our critics and understand that sometimes our voice are loud, but it is hard to build. So, okay, it is okay to say and speak your mind, but you also need to willing to stay in the room and do the work, because it is hard find the ways to continue to talk when you don't agree. So I feel that civil society are working very hard to build those rooms where we can feel safe to speak our minds and the things that we believe and the models that we understand. And to end, because I'm just talking too much, feel that like if we move humans from the center, we are just part of the system. We are not the center of the system. So if we have a nature-based system and humans is part of the biodiversity and the collective, I feel that we can have a message that is more strong for civil society as a whole. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, Luciana, please.
So maybe I'll follow on what Kamila just mentioned, and I'll bring maybe the perspective of business. When we, at the beginning, Tom was mentioning, we want to have like 1.3 trillion, and we have not reached that. What are the points that we are missing? And from a business perspective, there is this continuous discussion of there is enough money, but there are not enough projects. And projects say, listen, we have the projects, but there is not enough money. And I think that there was a very interesting study that unfortunately is not yet in English, but it's going to be published in English. Today it's in Portuguese. It was a study that was done by Bain, the consulting group, with the Brazilian Development Bank, with BNDES. And that study specifically, they have put together all the projects that are under the Brazilian country platform, the BIP, Brazil Investment Platform. And they try to understand why those projects had not yet been funded. Because you have like hydrogen projects there, you have fertilizer projects, you have different sorts of projects, and they were not financed yet. And what was very interesting in this study is that they try to, because when we are talking about it lacks project or it lacks money, it's a very broad discussion, but the devil definitely lies in the details. So I think that what was very interesting on this study is that it went into the details of why specific projects are not moving. What's the problem? The problem is the lack of technology or agreement on what technology is going to be the path forward. The problem is that you have a green premium that's too high and therefore nobody's willing to accept that premium. Or the problem is the lack of supply or lack of demand or lack of a value chain that's going to be there when you are. It's very important for us to realize that when we are talking about money flowing into these new ventures, we are building markets from scratch. The markets are not there. So when we are talking about investing in those segments, it's a question of not only let's put hydrogen together, but the entire value chain that is forming potentially this hydrogen market. And what are the roadblocks today? It's price, it's availability of something, it's logistics. So the study that was conducted by BNDES together with Bain was very, in my view, very interesting to point specifically what are the constraints. And on that side, I think it's very important as well for us to bring, once we have identified the constraints, the solutions for each one of the constraints are different. And there is a need here for us to bring different voices and different kinds of capital and different sorts of solutions. So let me give you an example. Maybe you will need philanthropic capital at the beginning and a more development money at the middle of it. And then you're going to be able to bring commercial money for a certain project to happen. Maybe the problem is not money. Maybe what we need for a specific, let me give you an example, shipping industry, okay? With the IMO, you have, in theory, even though it was postponed in 1 year, you have, it's going to be mandatory for you to clean the maritime industry, or you're going to pay penalties. And if you look into the penalties that are going to be applied, and what is in the money in terms of technology for you to replace a certain bunker fuel by a certain new technology, biofuels are certainly a very interesting opportunity because it's in the money. It makes more sense for whoever is going to pay this check instead of paying the penalty to replace that with biofuels. But the problem here is not economic sense. The problem is lack of supply, because you do not have enough supply for the demand that's potential here if you decide for that technological route. So it seems to me that besides the coalitions that are being formed, each sector has a specific set of roadblocks of why the sector is not moving in the right direction. And it's very important for us to understand the entire value chain, considering that we are creating new markets from scratch. So you really have to understand each step of the way. So trying to answer your not an easy question that you did.
I think that was deeply informative, and I appreciate the different approaches in terms of specificity of what are the mechanisms, right, within civil society, what are the mechanisms within business. I have, there's a couple of questions I'd love to bring up, but I just want to do a time check really quick because I know we don't want to go over too much. So Malu, if we take one more question. Okay, perfect. Let's see, making sure I can see. Yeah, so Cynthia and Kamila, please feel free to add as well. I think coming to your point, Luciana, about creating these markets, right, kind of from scratch. The questions in the chat I find really compelling are thinking about the sustainability, and not just necessarily ecological environmental sustainability, but longevity, right? And we opened today's session talking about the volatility of politics these days. And so I'm curious if you could talk to what kind of factors, what indicators for sustainability within these value chains that you are creating, or within the sort of pathways forward that your sectors are interested in, if it's not a value chain. What are the indicators that you're looking for in terms of sustainability and longevity? There's a question here about the global ethical balance sheet, and I think for me, that brings up what are the pillars, right? Regardless of who's in office, what their priorities are, what are the pillars upon which your initiatives stand, and how do you see them moving past and forward volatile political changes?
I can take the last one, Ori, because it's also related to the previous question as well. Because I think I am in a really privileged position in being in a philanthropy, because sometimes people see philanthropies as this magical source of money, but it's not only funding. We have like the role and also responsibility of convening power, and so it's really a privilege to bring together like civil society and grassroots movements, but also big coalitions that put together private sector and financial sector as well, and subnational governments to find this space. Because sometimes, as Luciana was saying, it's not only the perspective of not having a market, but also or not having finance, but also a market, value chains, and also the social consensus that not necessarily will be like the best one for all the sectors, but we need to move forward with implementation, with the energy transition, with the agricultural transition, with conserving land use, and also human rights. And it's not easy for a population and for a society. Imagine in Brazil, for instance, we have a really deep, complex scenario as a democracy, to have all the sectors involved and also not necessarily have the space for having the discussion. And so philanthropy comes as an ally to bring all of these together and to create a space and also to accelerate implementation, but with the mission of leaving no one behind. And so it's a balance that we do need to have, because the scenario is becoming more and more complex. Of course, I think each person will say that we are living the most complex scenario in our lives, but I do think we are at this moment with the need of rapid transition, with the complex geopolitical scenario, with the solutions that are coming and will change like year by year, and having more solutions that we don't know yet, and they will surge, and how to connect this to peoples, how to connect this to communities, and also to connect this to governments, regulation, business, and financial sectors. It will be a challenge for our decade in the pace that we need. And so this brings us to this discussion on the Global Ethical Stock Take, because it was also an innovation from the Brazilian presidency. That was a discussion that brought together people that are not climate geeks, and with climate geeks, but not only this, with artists, with people from communities, to bring the solutions that is basically to respond the question. We know what's causing the harm that we are facing now with climate change. We know that we have solutions, and we know that we have money. So what's happening that we are not having this? And the main conclusion, there is a big report that of course, I didn't have time to read this completely after COP. It was launched during COP, but that brings a summary of all the discussions. But an easy answer is that we need to build other social pacts for the challenge that we have nowadays, that's not only being responded by the convention, not being responded by our social systems, but we need to create this new compact among society that is not excluding the view from civil society, from the view from the economic sector, because it won't lead us to a better pathway that we are now. So, but I am on the optimistic view that COP30 and also the implementation cycle that we will have in the next decade will bring these challenges and discussions together. It won't be easy, but at least we have all the elements on the table to have this discussion.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to just, I think, one last question, picking up from these discussions, right? This kind of terminology comes up: conversations, discussions, consensus. Something that you said, Kamila, that was really, that I wrote down because I found it really gripping, was that the Amazon isn't a strategy, it's my home. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the language that we use. I think so much of COP is, right? What is it? 1.5? Is it 2? Is it scale down? Is it scale out? Right? Like how the language that we use and how imperative that is to the actions that we employ. And so, Kamila, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about if there are ways. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Carla
no
had
problem.
left. She had
Oh.
internet issues. Yeah,
Oh, no.
unfortunately. Yeah.
That's unfortunate. Well, I'm going to send her this question. I'll email it to her because I'm very curious. Well, this could be a question for all of you. You know, if there are ways that we can, the terminology, the language that we use, if there are words or aspects that you wish would just retire, some things that, misconceptions that maybe are more popular than you would like. Often those misconceptions are purported with by these oil tycoons that we know. And if there are other ways of communicating, to your point, Kamila, about the importance of communication.
So I can start. Definitely there's different ways of communications. I feel that like we very often decide that climate communication has to be siloed, and we speak a language that just the very young people in the bubble understands. And I feel that like I understand that is important to be really, really attached to science and data. But there's a balance between the science information and how people can understand and receive that information. And very often we kind of manipulate conversations to drive the responsibilities to individuals. It's kind of the same of saying, you know, just 5 minutes of shower when some sectors uses thousands of liters of water for like one product to be made. So it's like, it's not my shower time that matters, is you are not optimizing your production and your supply chain to be more on hydric intelligence. Like those are the things that the industry frames to make individuals feel powerless. You know, like, because the problem is so big that we cannot be hopeful active, because like you just feel powerless. So what I like to say is that there's this climate narrative around disaster, which is like, I understand the problem is really big, but our brain cannot unsee things. If we just say the things that are really, really bad and we are not driven by solutions, definitely we stay stuck. Professor, I remember, I think it's Denise Biden from the UK. She was studying the difference between catastrophic narratives versus solution-driven narrative. And people that read more catastrophic news, they feel like there's nothing they can do. But those that are more receiving more like solution-driven journalism and communication, they actually feel that the journalism are more serious when are delivered in terms of solution-driven approach, right? So like we have this decision to make right now. And to be honest, it is a tool to say that even in a moment where renewables are more competitive than fossil fuels, like we know that, we've been seeing that, it's proven. But it is easier to say that it's not enough, that we still need a buffer of fossil fuels just to electric security. We don't need that. We have the conditions to make different. But I also understand that entire governments has their investments in those companies. When you look who are the shareholders of those companies, most governments has their papers in those companies as well. So like if that business fail, the government fails as well. So like I understand the economics behind it's really complex. But if we want to continue to exist as a global community, we need to change our economic approach. And again, we've been making, like we have the World Economic Forum to talk economics, but I understand that we may COP, the climate talks, and economic talk as well. So like if we're gonna make this topic economic topic, we need, from my perspective, a little bit of radical thinkers just to question a little bit how the system works and bring a little flavor to the table so just people can think a little bit outside of the box.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we're all in little boxes right now on Zoom, but we do exist outside of those boxes. We will leave these boxes. And so I think that's a really important and well-received reminder. And with that, I'm just going to extend my deep gratitude to you all for sharing your wisdom and experience and expertise. And I will pass the mic back to Tom.
Oh boy, I got the job of finishing up. I'm going to need some help from, like I said, a little help from my friends to get through this. And maybe I'll ask each one of you as you collect your thoughts. And thank you for those great questions online, by the way. And people may want to, the speakers may want to glance at them because I'd like each speaker to say one thing by way of a takeaway. My own thoughts. I've loved this conversation. I think you've done the right job. Everybody has done the right job of saying just how important this was for Brazil, how you can't judge it as a total success, but certainly it wasn't a failure. It moved the ball forward and it sets the world up for the agenda that lies ahead. And in my view, some of the messaging is, I had a way of saying it. I said, are we losing the information war? And it's very hard to convince people to take actions which are against their financial interests, like scaling back investment in oil and gas and polluting industries and length of your shower, right, Kamila? It's hard to get people to do that, but somehow the messaging has to be better. People just don't understand, and COP has become quite distant from. It has to be explained in better language, so we need leaders who are able to do this. Easy to say, harder to do, but we do need leaders over this next year. And maybe that's the role of the Brazilian presidency that continues, as we all know, up until Istanbul. Second, the role of communication. The second are the action agenda items. They can be seen as, well, gee, more, let's sit around and talk and multi-sector and use jargon, but we need to get something done. Luciana has reminded us that everybody thinks it's a great idea to invest in great industries, but they can't seem to get agreement on, do we have enough projects? Do we have enough money? And it could be that we just haven't talked enough about those opportunities. Luciana kept telling us, we're building new markets from scratch. So she's pointing to an information problem there too. Maybe we have spread our resources too thin, even here in Brazil, let alone elsewhere in the world. And we need to focus more what government does, what the private sector does, what civil society does, what academia does. I would say that by a way of communication, but not to let governments forget about this action agenda that came out of Belém. There's even some other action agendas, the global ethical balance that I hadn't paid enough attention to. There's a land tenure initiative that was also launched to protect indigenous people. But then there are the three that I did mention, which were roadmap to fossil fuels, zero deforestation, and trade and climate. We have to, those of us in civil society, and a special role for students and academia, follow up, demand action, focus on those in the buildup over the next 11 months or so to Istanbul coming up. So those, my colleague Vinny asked a question. We didn't quite have time to get into it, but the role he stresses of collective action. I'll finish with comments from Marina and then ask each of you to say one thing, please, by way of conclusion. Marina Silva, the world renowned environmental minister, at the conclusion, when asked, what happened? Was it a success? Was it a failure? She said this: we continue to be able to cooperate with one another, to learn and to recognize that there are no shortcuts, and that the courage to confront the climate crisis is a result of collective perseverance and effort. So those kind of words to live by, and I'll make her takeaway mine. And I'd like maybe to turn it over if I could. We'll finish with you, Ori, but we'll start with you, Luciana, then you, Kamila, then Cíntya, and Ori. One takeaway from each of you. What should we have said at the conclusion of this event that will prepare us for COP31? Luciana?
Tom, I think that in a world of polarization, there are opportunities for multilateralism and for countries like Brazil to play a relevant role. So my hope here is that we keep on going. I think that we have done a good work till here, but there is much more to be done, and there is a space to be occupied and for multilateralism to really become reality. So that's my thought.
Thank you, Luciana, very much. Kamila?
And I would say that give up's not an option. Our future are at stake, our present are at stake. And we need to keep doing everything that we have in our power to make sure that we are safeguarding our existence and the existence of the other beings beyond us.
Thank you, Camilo. Well said. Cíntya?
My main takeaway is that this was a COP that we will need to be watched from the rear view mirror when we settle down a bit after a deserved rest, and also to see COPs as they are as process. We need to pay more attention in things that happen between one COP and the other, because it's the real value that we have on implementation. Of course, we need to give more speed, but things are happening, and so let's celebrate also, and also to have this collective action to recognize what's happening, to check COP by COP what needs to be done.
Thank you so much, Cíntya. And I'll finish my involvement today and with my personal thanks, sincere personal thanks to each of you, and remind everybody, stay on the line. Those of you who haven't had to drop off, stay on the line and fill out that survey. It will be flashing on your screen when this is over. Ori, you have the final word, maybe the despedida, and perhaps urging us on to COP31. Ori?
Wow, okay. No big deal. No, I think for me, the realization or the understanding that the antidote to climate depression, nostalgia, anxiety isn't hope necessarily. It's justice and accountability. I think when things work how they're supposed to, when people do what they're supposed to, we don't need to make up reasons to be hopeful. And I think we have really great examples here of what it looks like, that we know what needs to be done. So let's go ahead and do it.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Tom, Carla left a message. May I read it to you?
Surely.
So she would like to leave us with one last thought. The COPs needs to reflect the needs of those living in the territories to pressure not only international policy for significant progress, but also domestic policy, which needs to advance in accordance with the needs of the most vulnerable populations. Therefore, we need to implement actions and build effective finance mechanisms for those at the grassroots level, sustaining the ecosystem. It's true that we've made a lot of progress, but for the challenges ahead, we need to ensure that people are at the center of the climate solutions.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mother. Well, thank you, everybody who's joined us here today. Thank you for those who are online or will listen to the recording of this very informative event, which I consider gives me personally, and I suspect many of us along the line, a lot of hope coming out of COP30, a lot to build on, but a lot of reasons for optimism and also encouragement to keep working harder collectively. So thanks, everybody. Thanks again. See you all soon on the road to COP31. Bye-bye.